Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief, available at claireandhoratio.com. Let's start with a concrete scenario. Imagine you're standing on the Black Sea coast of Romania. So you're in a NATO-allied country, just looking out at the water.
Right.
And suddenly, a massive naval drone just self-detonates right off the coast. It sends shockwaves toward a local oil terminal. But here's the thing. The drone wasn't aimed at Romania.
No, it exploded there because the invisible web of Russian electronic warfare is so intense right now. It's designed to scramble GPS signals, but it's literally spilling over international borders and forcing these weapons to miscalculate.
Which brings the physical danger of the war directly to the borders of the NATO alliance. The perimeter of this conflict is clearly not contained.
Not at all. And that Romanian coast incident is, well, it's a perfect example of how military planners can't neatly box in a conflict like this.
And this military escalation is just one half of a very strange dual-track strategy coming out of Kyiv right now. Because at the exact same time, Ukraine launched those drone strikes on 5 Russian cargo ships in the Sea of Azov.
Which was a coordinated effort to cripple the logistics of stolen grain and military fuel, we should add.
Exactly, targeting the logistics. But simultaneously, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky publishes this defiant 1,800-word open letter proposing face-to-face peace talks with Vladimir Putin. And he bluntly states he's making this move because the U.S. is currently entirely distracted by Iran.
You really have to look at the timing here. By openly acknowledging Washington's pivot toward the Middle East, Kyiv is signaling that they know they're vulnerable.
Yeah, offering an olive branch while striking coastal logistics.
Right. It's an attempt to force the adversary to the table from a position of, if not strength, then immediate annoyance.
But let's look at the actual text of Zelensky's letter, because the tone is aggressively unconventional for a diplomatic proposal. I mean, he openly mocks Putin's age.
Yeah, he highlights his 26 years in power, pointing out the physical and mental toll.
Which makes you question the real mechanism here. If you are genuinely pleading for a ceasefire, you don't usually start by insulting the autocrat across the table. It reads like a calculated public relations maneuver to retain European backing while Washington looks away, especially knowing the terms will be rejected. I mean, U.S. President Donald Trump just responded by saying, "Get it done," and insisting both sides will make compromises.
But the structural reality makes a sudden breakthrough highly unlikely, regardless of what Washington wants. Putin recently told foreign journalists he's open to negotiations, but then he immediately dismantles the premise of those talks by questioning Zelensky's legal legitimacy, citing the suspension of Ukrainian elections.
Even though suspending elections under martial law is a constitutional provision in their system, which Putin obviously knows. Plus, the Russian prerequisite for peace is still that Ukraine permanently cede 4 entire regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, and abandon any NATO aspirations forever.
And those demands are complete non-starters for Kyiv. So, because these political stances are immovable, the real consequence for the public is a prolonged, grinding conflict.
Sustained volatility in global energy and food markets.
Exactly. And on the ground, it means a daily, continuous loss of human life. Local officials reported at least 13 people killed and over 70 injured in Ukraine just over the past 24 hours.
Including 4 deaths at a dairy factory hit by Russian drones. The cost of stalled diplomacy is paid by civilians just going about their daily lives. Now, in a related geopolitical development, that shifting focus of U.S. foreign policy is creating space for other global powers to consolidate alliances in Asia. Chinese President Xi Jinping is visiting Kim Jong-un in North Korea next week.
Which is a massive signal. It's his first visit in nearly 7 years, and it coincides with the 65th anniversary of their mutual defense pact.
Right, and that is the only formal defense pact China holds with any country in the world.
It is. Beijing is executing a really complex strategy here. Xi is visibly wary of the burgeoning military relationship between Kim and Putin, because that introduces a chaotic wild card that Beijing doesn't control.
But China remains North Korea's absolute economic lifeline. Kim desperately needs this visit to secure cross-border trade and Chinese tourism for his new resorts. And he's doing this while completely isolating his neighbors. I mean, Kim just boasted that North Korea's capacity to produce weapons-grade nuclear material has more than doubled.
Over the past 5 years, yeah. He's expanding his nuclear arsenal while South Korea is, well, they're currently entirely frozen out of communications with Pyongyang.
We saw that freeze out on a cultural level last month. The North Korean women's professional football team visited South Korea, and they barely acknowledged the public at the airport, coldly shook hands, and played unusually aggressively on the field. Given all that, how does Beijing balance propping up a nuclear-armed Pyongyang while trying to project global stability?
Well, South Korean officials are openly hoping she might act as a mediator to nudge Pyongyang back to dialogue. But expectations should remain grounded. I mean, after a recent meeting between President Trump and President Xi, the White House said both leaders shared the goal of denuclearizing North Korea.
But when a Chinese spokesperson was asked about it, they refused to confirm it, right? They just used vague language about maintaining continuity.
Precisely. Pyongyang has made it abundantly clear it won't abandon its nuclear ambitions, and Beijing fundamentally prioritizes a stable, allied buffer state over a denuclearized peninsula.
Now, while China plays this very overt statecraft game in Asia, they are executing a covert strategy right inside the United States. We're following the case of Thomas Weir-Paulkin II. He's a 50-year-old U.S. journalist who lived in China for over a decade and just pleaded guilty to acting as an illegal agent for the PRC.
It's a striking case of modern espionage mechanics.
He worked for media organizations like China Central Television and Xinhua News, and he received over $100,000 from a handler named Kathy to gather intelligence on American targets and facilitate cyber espionage for a hacking group in Wuhan.
To really understand this, we have to look at why a journalist is a perfect vector for intelligence gathering. Foreign intelligence services actively co-opt trusted professions to exploit the freedoms of a democratic society.
Because a journalist has a legitimate reason to ask probing questions.
Exactly. They can request meetings with sensitive personnel, gather background info on infrastructure.
It's basically social engineering disguised as a press pass. The FBI indictment details how Paulkin wasn't just passing along gossip. He was mapping out intelligence targets. By making press inquiries, he identified specific individuals with access to valuable U.S. data.
And then he fed that precise targeting information back to the cyber operatives in Wuhan so they could launch highly customized phishing or hacking attacks.
Which shatters the trust required for a free press to function, turning civic openness into a severe security vulnerability. And quickly, for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarineratio.com. Now, shifting from international statecraft, let's look at what happens when domestic institutions meant to protect citizens completely collapse from the inside.
The situation in France right now is a grim example of that.
It is. In southwestern France, there is unified national outrage over the murder of an 11-year-old girl named Liana. The principal suspect, a 41-year-old named Jerome B., had 4 prior complaints of inappropriate behavior or assault involving minors.
So the failure here wasn't a lack of warning signs. The authorities were entirely aware of the threat this individual posed. It's a catastrophic breakdown of public safety protocols.
The most enraging part happened just last August. The mother of a 10-year-old girl named Rosa filed a fully substantiated rape complaint against him. There were medical examinations. Yet, investigators ignored the complaint for 9 months entirely due to jurisdictional transfers between administrative departments.
This is where we see paralyzing adherence to procedure, overriding the assessment of an immediate threat. When a department receives a severe criminal complaint, but prioritizes administrative jurisdiction, literally shuffling paperwork to determine whose budget it falls under.
The institution fails its primary mandate. Bureaucratic sluggishness gave a known predator 9 months of unimpeded freedom,
And the ultimate cost of that delay was a child's life.
which has prompted immediate demands for reform across the entire political spectrum. Jordan Bardella, on the hard right, said the justice system is fundamentally dysfunctional. Maureen Tondelier on the left called it a symbol of a system incapable of handling sexual violence. President Emmanuel Macron admitted the handling was unacceptable, and the Prime Minister has demanded a comprehensive report within 15 days.
When an institution's first instinct is to defer responsibility rather than take protective action, the public recognizes the failure instantly. That 15-day report is really just a desperate attempt to project control over a system the public correctly perceives as broken.
Now, the inability to track and contain a known threat isn't limited to criminal justice. In the U.S., officials are battling an outbreak of the flesh-eating New World screwworm in Texas. This is the first U.S. infection in 60 years.
The biology of this parasite is just brutal.
Female screwworm flies lay their eggs in the open wounds of warm-blooded animals, and when they hatch, the larvae literally burrow through and consume the living flesh of the host.
While the direct threat to humans is statistically low, if this pest establishes a foothold, the economic threat to the public is massive. It will devastate the domestic beef and dairy markets, leading to severe supply shortages and spiking grocery prices.
The USDA is trying to contain it with a 20-kilometer control zone and Beagle Brigade sniffer dogs at the border. But their primary weapon is releasing genetically altered, sterile flies, which requires massive scale.
Yeah, the sterile insect technique, it relies on a biological trait. Wild female screwworms only mate once in their lifetime, so if you release millions of sterilized males, the wild female's eggs remain unfertilized.
They used this in the 70s to push the screwworm all the way down to Panama, right?
They did. Back then, they were releasing up to 700 million sterile flies every single week across Central America.
Which brings us to the current bottleneck. U.S. officials say they need up to 600 million sterile flies each week to fight this Texas outbreak. But current U.S. and Mexico facilities only have the capacity for about 100 million a week.
They're fighting a biological invasion with a massive supply deficit.
It's like bailing out a sinking battleship with a single bucket. And the response has rapidly fractured into partisan blame. Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller wants insecticide traps, which federal officials dismissed due to severe cancer risks. U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins blamed open border policies. Meanwhile, critics point to the Trump administration eliminating the specific USAID program designed to track screwworms in Central America.
But those partisan arguments really obscure the environmental reality. The screwworm has steadily rampaged northward through Central America since 2022, moving entirely through Mexico by 2024. And entomologists point to a distinct climate shift.
Right, because they are native to tropical regions.
Exactly, but changing climate conditions are creating warmer, more hospitable environments much further north, which facilitates this steady migration.
We've talked a lot today about feeling tracking systems and border logistics in the developed world. But we need to look at the fatal reality for vulnerable populations navigating borders with zero infrastructure or safety nets. In the Sahara Desert, in northern Niger, at least 49 people have died of thirst after their transport truck broke down 50 miles from the Asamaka border crossing.
This is a tragedy we have to treat with the utmost seriousness. That desert remains a heavily trafficked transit corridor for people moving across West Africa, despite being one of the most hostile environments on Earth.
These individuals were returning from a festival in Mali. According to the Agadez governor, they spent days trying to repair the truck with absolutely no water or shade. Dozens of bodies were found underneath and around the vehicle, just seeking whatever minimal shelter it offered from the lethal heat. A second broken-down lorry with 60 people was eventually found and rescued.
It's a stark reminder of the human impact of regional instability. You have to ask what forces people to take a route with such absolute lethal risks.
Desperate economic conditions.
Exactly. Systemic instability strips away safer alternatives, forcing vulnerable people into these perilous migration corridors just to seek a livelihood.
Looking at everything we've covered today, we're observing several distinct pressures moving in completely different directions. We've got state-level military and diplomatic posturing reshaping Europe and Asia. We have rigid bureaucratic paralysis costing a child's life in France, overwhelmed agricultural defenses in the U.S., and the devastating vulnerability of travelers in the Sahara.
These events all force a difficult consideration about the systems and policies meant to protect human life. Whether it's a stalled peace negotiation, a supply deficit of sterile flies, or a legal jurisdiction dispute, the ultimate cost of institutional friction always falls on the public.
So what happens when the gap between a policy's intent and its actual execution is paid for in human lives? It's something we all need to consider. We invite you to visit clarinhoratio.com for more daily world briefs and classic audiobooks.